my research, it's really dealing with the frontier as its own religion. And so it's not looking at this idea of just Protestants and Mormons and how they encounter each other, but more how they both encounter this larger trajectory of the frontier itself. And so as they both see the frontier is a type of revelation to them. It's revealing to them what the Bible means. And so as they go into this frontier, as they imagine it, and as they label it, they're seeing the Bible being played out in real time. And so it's not just this Old Testament or New Testament, it's a current testament of Jesus's footprints in America. And so both of them, Protestants and Mormons, are trying to complete the kingdom of God in America. And as they do that, God's coming back to earth is a real reality. And so both of them are looking at each other as kind of ruining this enterprise, this project. And so both of them are upset with each other. And so a lot of the conflict that's happening from what I cover is I started in the 1850s. And so it's looking at an actual Utah war that happened where federal troops were sent to Utah to take care of this Mormon rebellion. And what happens is it kind of becomes much ado about nothing, in the sense that troops end up in a burned down fort during the winter, which is below freezing. They hate it, and then they hate Mormons even more from it. They're hoping that once it thaws, they can go and take care of these Mormons. But what we have is this amnesty that happens from the president and says basically, Mormons are okay. You know, they allowed us to put our own federally appointed governor up there. And so with this, Brigham Young says, fine, we'll allow your federal appointee to be here, but in reality, he keeps a lot of power. And so there's a lot of uneasiness that retains, and the Mormon kingdom is something that continues to be built. And what's important to note is this Mormon kingdom goes until Brigham Young's death in 1870, and still goes a few decades after that. But in a real way, he creates this like 300 plus different colonies. And so he's really founding and colonizing the West in a real way. And this whole time, Protestants in the East are really kind of ticked off about this concept. And so, but one way you can control this kingdom is by sending is through legislation. Troops didn't work, so maybe we can legislate in Congress against Mormons. And so polygamy became a way of controlling the economy in Utah, controlling the colonies, controlling basically the social makeup of Utah, and therefore Mormonism itself. And so this creates a type of anti-polygamy crusades in the 1870s and 80s, to where through this, it doesn't just go through Congress, but the Supreme Court itself gets involved and actually defines what it means to have religious freedom in America, which in short means you can believe what you want, but you can't do what you want. And so through this, Mormons are allowed to believe in polygamy, but they can't do polygamy. And so this then goes on and on throughout the 80s, where you have these heavier and more harsh legislation that happens, and this ends up transforming Mormonism itself. So by 1890, when the church goes and they go before the Supreme Court arguing religious freedom, the court says, we've already defined it, you don't belong, because you're not even a religion anyways. And so, because you're doing polygamy, that's not religion. Religion is Protestant. And so Mormons then agree to give up polygamy, but what this does is it opens this an approach that Mormonism can present itself to the outside world. And I should say, when I'm stating the term Mormon, it's a very historical term that's always been fraught. Some Mormon groups like it, some Mormon groups don't. Some groups like it at one time, and then at another time they don't. And so I'm using it as shorthand for right now in Utah as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But it becomes a helpful shorthand here in talking about how they were understood as they go to this World Fair in 1893 in Chicago, which they didn't think they wanted to go to at first, but then there's this guy named Brigham H. Roberts, who was a leader in the church, who says, guys, there's this great fair going on. If we can present ourselves at the Parliament of Religion, then people will see how cool we are. And so he actually goes in there eventually and is going to talk about the Mormonism as he calls it, the American religion, the new real American religion that brings all other religions together, because it's this belief in faith type of thing that we all share. But Mormonism, he says, if this age of science wants more evidence, Mormonism has more evidence than any other religion. They've got the Book of Mormon, they've got additional scriptures with the Doctrine and Covenants, they've got a living prophet who continues to give evidence for God. And so with this, he sees himself as this pinnacle of religion. And within this context of religious evolution, as this framework of understanding it, he sees Mormonism as this pinnacle of evolution, which doesn't go well. He ends up getting kicked out of the Parliament of Religion. And one way that this is able to happen is a Muslim gets up and he starts talking, but he's asked to talk about polygamy and in Islam. And so he brings up how you can be a good person and a polygamist, as long as you're not a sensualist, he calls it. And the crowd erupts in boos and hisses. And with this, that's when B.H. Roberts is no longer on the list, because he's too controversial, etc. In fact, I should say B.H. Roberts is a polygamist. And so there's a lot of context here going on. And also just a couple of years after these national debates and wars against Mormonism and polygamy and all that. But what happened and what's significant about this is that in religion, he got kicked out. But in the more secular states and territory exhibitions at the World's Fair, Mormonism presents itself as pioneers of the frontier. And what this shows is this old idea of the frontier as a type of revelation of what true religion is, has now transformed into a type of romanticism. The cowboy is now romantic. Buffalo Bill is doing his shows there, riding horses, and with even having buffalo on scene to shoot, to show how cool we can still kill buffaloes, which is this romantic vision. And so even the leader of the Church of Mormonism, Wilford Woodruff, was there, and he spoke of himself as a type of pioneer. Others talked about Brigham Young as the epitome of a pioneer. He went west and settled things when there was nothing there, type of thing. So what's significant about this is that the crowd loved this. People saw Mormonism as no longer this weird, wacky, polygamous group, but now a pioneer people. People who were on the frontier, who became this type of sterling, scrappling people. And so whatever weirdness they had was now seen as like what the frontier just does. It takes weirdness and it transforms it into true Americanness. So Mormons then become Americans at this moment in the popular perspective. And with this, my own research will then travel further beyond, where in 1907, or in 1903, we see this Mormon apostle enter into the Senate. And what this happens is the whole nation is saying, we're not sure if we're ready for a Mormon to be making laws for the rest of America. And so after a 3-year or 4-year investigation, they finally allow this Mormon guy to be a senator. And so through that whole argument, we start to see how the frontier itself becomes more of a Theodore Roosevelt sterling stuff, and Mormons become that sterling stuff. So from 1850, when the nation was fighting over the kingdom of God, to 1907, when the nation was looking for a sterling, manly scrapper, we see Mormonism being transformed at the same time to where it becomes that scrapper. In a sense, it becomes those pioneers. And it's at that time we start seeing Mormons refer to themselves as these pioneers. They start looking at Pioneer Day, for example. July 24th becomes a sacred day for Mormons, where they can kind of see themselves and even reenact this story of the pioneer trek. So everything gets redesigned, reconfigured, but this is not just a Mormon story. It's a national story of the country going from a Protestant pseudo-theocracy to a type of secular, Protestant, liberal, secular nation state. And so that is where a lot of my research is focused on.